Hello, and welcome to The Resource, the podcast propelling employer brands to recruit smarter and retain better. I'm your host, Priscilla Peters.
And I'm your other host, Scott Dismute. Priscilla, how was your Halloween?
It was good. Listen, it was kind of uneventful. My 13-year-old decided she's done trick-or-treating. And had she told me that last year when she was 12, I think I would have made like a bigger deal about it because she's our youngest. So this is the last trick-or-treating, and I didn't realize it was the last. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm fine with it, but we had a good time. Our new neighborhood, they love it. It's all the things. It was fun.
Well, I can tell you it will not be the last. My 20-year-old sent my wife and I a picture from a Halloween party that he went to at the University of Arkansas.
Oh, Lord.
And he was dressed as a hot dog.
Okay. He was a Halloweenie. I'm told that's what that is. A Halloweenie.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. You win. You win. That's the best. A Halloweenie. I wish I would have thought of that. I would have texted it back to him. But okay, so here's my big question for you. Since I know this is a little bit of a different podcast than what we normally do, here's my question for you. It is now post Halloween.
Yes.
Is it okay to start listening to Christmas music?
I say it is. I mean, I don't know that I'm necessarily going to do that, but I'm down with it. Listen, I've got a girlfriend who posted the night after Halloween. She posted a picture of her tree fully up, done, like it's a done deal. So I'm all for it. Listen, let's do it. Now, here's what I'm not for. I'm not for leaving that business up through Easter. Like after Christmas, let's take it down. That's how, because I can't, I mean, literally mine is down by noon on the 26th. Like I'm done.
Yeah, we're really, really bad at the Dismute household about getting that Christmas tree down. I'm not going to embarrass my wife and confess to everybody how long it took to get our Christmas tree down last year. But I will say this: we could have potentially had a Valentine's Day tree. I'm not saying that we did. I'm just saying potentially we could have. So I'll just leave it at that, or my wife will strangle me, and I'll never be on one of these again. If I confess too much. So before we get to obviously Christmas, we have the, I think now soon to be forgotten, Thanksgiving holiday. So what are you looking forward to most about Thanksgiving? What food are you looking forward to the most?
Yes. So we go to our family farm. It's so fun. Like we're in our sweatpants, like it's amazing. And I will say, for me, the dish of choice, actually dishes of choice. So I make the dressing. I'm like the dressing person. And it's like my grandma's recipe. It's a big deal. Like I cook it in the same dish she did, like all the things. But I like to mix the dressing with the sweet potatoes and get a little salty and sweet together, maybe with a piece of ham. I'm not a turkey girl, to be honest, but
no.
What about you?
I like it. Well, I like a good fried turkey.
Oh yeah.
I like a good fried turkey. That's good. So my specialty to make, and I make it for all of our family dinners, is the mashed potatoes.
Okay.
And I put all sorts of goodness in the mashed potatoes. So there's some cream cheese in my mashed potatoes. There's a lot of butter. There's some salt. I actually put a little mayonnaise in my mashed potatoes. My wife likes to tell me that I put just enough potatoes in it to hold all the other stuff that I put in the potatoes. So I enjoy eating some good mashed potatoes, and I try to get them to be as lumpy free as possible. I like smooth, velvety smooth mashed potatoes. My mother-in-law makes a squash souffle that basically tastes like pumpkin pie. It's fantastic, but I also love her dressing. And I like to have I like to eat the dressing with a little bit of the mashed potatoes. I do like that.
Yes, I like to mix it. Like, let's mix it up. Listen, let me tell you what else I make that everybody loves, but I hate to make is deviled eggs. Like, I love deviled eggs, but to make them is disgusting. It just makes sure house stink and all the things. But listen, my husband, I mean, when I start making the deviled eggs, everybody comes out. They're like, "Oh, I'm ready. I want one." They eat half of them before we even get to the. But yeah, I don't like making them. But for whatever reason, I'm the one that has to make those too. So But I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm not a big deviled egg fan, but yeah, I love me some Thanksgiving. So I'm definitely looking forward to it, being with some family over a few days, watching some football. So speaking of that, we'll have the Arkansas Missouri game. Will be the day after Thanksgiving.
Do we really care, Scott? Do we care at this point? Like,
Well, I mean, so I do care
mm,
because obviously we've had this discussion before. I'm from Missouri. My son goes to Arkansas, so
okay.
it's kind of a weird deal when Arkansas and Mizzou play because I kind of can't lose. So if Arkansas loses and Mizzou
Well,
wins,
that's good because you've been used to losing all year.
well, you're not wrong about that either. But basketball season's coming up,
Yes,
so
I'm ready for basketball season. Like, let's
yeah,
go. Let's go.
yeah,
All right.
let's do it.
Well, we have like you said, a different kind of episode that we're going to kind of dive into today. So, what do you say? Let's get to it.
Let's go for it. All right, everybody. We don't have a special guest per se on the show today. The special guest is actually going to be unveiling the results of our fall 2023 driver survey. So we've been doing these surveys now, I guess, really since the spring of COVID, and it's really one of our most popular data pieces that we put out. I think Priscilla can maybe speak to that a little bit, but this is one of the most popular things that we put out. It's the most downloaded thing that we put out. And so we have the survey results. We conducted the survey kind of mid-September through mid-October and really had a great response from drivers. We had over 1,500 responses from drivers. It was about, kind of a 10%, a little over 10% response rate. All of the surveys are emailed out to drivers, and we get their responses back. And so we were actually very, very pleased with the response rates. Priscilla, do you want to speak a little bit to kind of how much this is downloaded and how
Yeah, so we push out a few pieces of content, what I would call like core pieces of content every year. We do two driver surveys, one in the fall, one in the spring. We do an annual report, and then we do quarterly data downloads. And overwhelmingly, the driver survey and the annual report, honestly, but our two driver surveys are the two pieces that are typically downloaded the most because people want to hear like what are drivers' opinions regarding, all the topics of the day, if you will. And so yeah, this is something that's definitely a great piece for you to download and go through with your team. You can go to the resource at conversionia.com. All of our resources are there. The resource.conversionia.com. All of our resources live there. You can download all of those pieces. And so we also just released our Q3 data download not long ago. So that would be another good one to look at. But yeah, this is a really great piece of content. A lot of folks use it to just kind of make some decisions when they're, making decisions that really impact the driver for sure.
Yeah. So what we want to do today is just kind of walk through the survey, walk through the results, kind of talk through some of the interesting things that we found. And so let's get started with the first question. So really the first question here is we kind of want an age demographic. We kind of want to know who is answering the survey, and it kind of gives us an idea. And you'll see this as we get a little bit later into this, how I think you look at the age of this, because you can see really about 50% of the respondents in the survey are between the ages of 36 and 55. And so what you're going to see here is some of the results maybe kind of reflect that, because we're going to get into things that talk about what are drivers thinking about right now? What's the most important thing? Where are they going on their smartphones when they're looking at apps and things of that nature? And so I think you're going to see some of the results, reflected in that. I think the other thing that this speaks to is if you really look at it, you're about 75% of this is from the ages of 36 to 65. And I think that also speaks to something that we've talked about a lot in the industry is kind of the aging workforce and the need to bring in younger drivers into the industry. You can see there 18 to 25 is really, less than 6% of the total respondents. So, Priscilla, what did you see on this?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's interesting, and this does kind of reflect the market, to be honest. But we always like to know, what the age demographics are. And then the second question that we ask, and we ask this question on every survey, is, are you currently looking for a job? And so the results on this one really reflected pretty much almost exactly what they reflected earlier this year in the spring when we asked this question. And I always say, this is a great argument to make sure that you have strategies in place where you're targeting what we call a more passive driver. So, a guy who might not currently be looking for a job, since the majority of the market today isn't. But I know, Scott, you have opinions here on what this, and I mean, honestly, opinions backed by the data, but how soft that number really is.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see, because the next two questions in the survey really are a follow up to how drivers responded to this question. And a couple things to note here. It's like Priscilla said, this is about 0.5% lower than what it was in the spring. It was 33.8% said that they were looking for a job in the spring. We're now at 33.3%. If you go back all the way to fall of last year, so almost a year ago, there was 40.2% that were actually looking for a job. I will tell you, just from our data, last fall is when we started really seeing the effects of the freight recession from a driver data standpoint, and drivers talking about their pay and their lack of miles or inconsistent miles. And so it didn't really surprise me that last year this number was elevated, probably to the highest that we've seen it since we've been asking this question. So now we're lower. I think this is the lowest it's ever been since we started recording this number, which I think has been for 4 or 5 surveys now that we've looked at this number. And so I think, yeah, I do think it's a soft number, and I think we're going to kind of reflect that as we get into the next question here. So the third question, again, is a follow up to the first question. So if drivers answered yes, that they're looking for a job, what are the reasons that you're looking? And so I think that this kind of gives an idea as to why this is kind of how the freight cycle and the freight recession is impacting this. So you can look, 62% of the drivers that are looking are saying they're looking for predictable pay. 39% are looking for more consistent miles. 36% are looking for stable freight. I think all three of those things really tie into one another. Drivers really look for predictable pay. That when you really dig into it, that is really the top answer overall. And it's not surprising that they're looking for predictable pay right now. We're seeing that from a turnover standpoint, that's really what drivers are looking for right now, is some sort of stable pay, stable freight, stable miles for that predictable pay. So that didn't necessarily surprise me. I think one of the things that I really wanted to point out, and Priscilla, I'll be interested in your take here, is if you go down to the 24.9% that said they're looking for better benefits. So this was actually something that we added as a response, because we started seeing this back in the spring with the other category where drivers were talking about benefits. And so we added that this year in this survey, and it's at basically 25%. And so, I think one of the things that we're looking at here is, obviously benefits matter. And I think from a driver perspective, and I had a conversation with one of our customers about 2 weeks ago on this exact thing, is how important are benefits? And benefits are one of those things that I firmly believe that they don't matter until they matter, and I know that sounds kind of obvious, but they don't matter until they matter. And so when you need them, when drivers need them, that's when benefits truly matter. I think from an advertising standpoint, Priscilla, I would be really interested in how benefits really fit into job descriptions, because this is a pretty significant number.
Yeah.
And so I would be interested in how many, what you hear from your clientele as it relates to what are they talking about from an advertising standpoint with benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. And it ends up being a lot about the job description, as you mentioned, like making sure, if there are differentiators in the benefits package that you have compared to the carriers that you're competing with in the markets where you're hiring drivers, you've got to highlight those in the job description. And I think later on in the data here in the survey, we're going to see benefits kind of come up again. And it is really interesting because some carriers really focus on that. I always say it's a good indicator of how well you're going to do when it comes to the driver's spouse. Specifically, if it's a male driver and a female spouse, because the mama's interested in the benefits, right? Like she wants to make sure that a lot of those things are taken care of for their family. And so I think it's really important. Another thing I always say here is when you look at this list and you see like these are reasons why drivers are leaving, like it's a great opportunity to go through this and do a little checklist. Like, how are we doing in all of these areas? Because this is where you're vulnerable to lose your drivers. So I think that's really important. And then question 4 was if you answered no, if you said, I'm not looking for a job, then why are you not looking? Now, this is where it gets pretty interesting because I think if we weren't in a freight recession, obviously these numbers would look different. There's a lot of kind of moving indicators here, Scott. I know you have, lots of takes on this, but this has the potential to really have more drivers looking once things do turn around.
Yeah, the responses here or why I said a couple minutes ago why I think that 33% that say they're not looking, why I think it's a soft number, because a couple things to point out here. 15.6% saying that they need more experience. So drivers are saying, I'm not looking right now because I need to gain experience. So we all know that kind of that 6 month mark is really where that kind of that magic number for drivers. Once they hit that 6 month mark, there's a lot of things that open up from them from a job opportunity standpoint. A lot of companies want 6 months experience before they can get a local job where their home time is, daily. And so if you think about that, there's 15.6% of the drivers in here that are just kind of waiting to that 6 month mark. And so that's a pretty significant number. Then if you drop down to the 13.9% that said that they're afraid to make a move in the economy, that's very significant. And it's also significant because if you go back to the spring, that number was 5% lower. And so what that tells me is anytime really within the next 6 months, let's say that the economy turns around, and hopefully, that it will. But let's say the freight recession eases up, the economy starts to turn around, maybe inflation goes down. So now you've got basically 28%, 29% of these drivers who said no, that's all going to change. You're going to have drivers that hit that 6 month experience mark, and you're going to have maybe a better economy that's more likely to cause some churn with your drivers. So that 33%, while it's the lowest that we've ever seen since we've collected that number, I think it's the softest that we've ever seen, just because of kind of what is going on within the industry right now from a freight recession standpoint. That's going to change a lot of things once that freight market turns around.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so let's go to question 5 here. And this was interesting to me. Are you optimistic that the freight recession is coming to an end? And I'm going to be just brutally honest here, Priscilla. I was shocked at this number. I really thought it would probably be more flipped. I thought it would be 56 no, 43% yes. And it's, quite frankly, it's the other way around. So 56% of the drivers said that they are optimistic that the freight recession is going to be coming to an end soon. Obviously, I think this is a positive for the industry. I guess it shows that some drivers have not lost all hope here. But I do think that if you look at, and I know, Priscilla, you talked about this not too long ago. I heard you speak on this. Historically, most freight recessions are kind of in that 18 to 22 month range. That's when most,
Right.
or how long a lot of these freight recessions last. If you look at it that way, we're kind of right there at the end of that. So I think if you kind of go back to that first question about the age demographic, it looks like we've got some experienced drivers in here who maybe have been through this before, maybe post or pre-COVID, when I think it was like 2019 was the last time we had somewhat of a slowdown in freight. I think the thing that maybe is somewhat not concerning here, but I think this freight recession is a little bit different. It just feels a little bit different. We keep hearing, and I know we had Bob on a couple months ago. He was saying that maybe, sometime in third, fourth quarter, we would see a little bit of a bump for holiday freight. Everything that I'm hearing and reading, that hasn't happened. It hasn't happened yet. Most of everybody that filled their inventory, had that inventory had gone away, so there was going to be a restocking. That hasn't happened. So I think you've got a lot of people that are waiting to see what happens with maybe some holiday shopping and see if there's a bump there. We're hearing now it's, first quarter, maybe second quarter before we see some things turn around. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty here. I would love, obviously, for this to be kind of coming to an end. But I'll be honest with you, everything that I'm reading, everything that I'm hearing, it does not seem to be near the end yet. And I don't know what you're hearing on that.
Yeah, pretty much the same. One of the things that Bob did say, I went to ATA a few weeks ago, and one of the things that he made a point of saying, in the past, when we have had a rebound from a freight recession, it's happened like it's turned on a dime really, really quickly. This time, he said, it will come down quick. Many of us in the room may not be prepared, but he made the analogy that instead of like it's a race car turning a corner, it may be more like a ship, turning a corner. Just we may not feel it. It might not feel exactly like it did before, which from my standpoint tells me even more important to get your driver pipeline in line, right? Because if we're not going to feel it like we did before, then it's still going to creep up on us, if we will. So I would just kind of make that note there. And then listen, here's the thing. If you're in this market today and you're still hiring drivers, you need to fill capacity, and you are offering a competitive pay rate with competitive miles in this market, you need to tell that story. Because if we know there's drivers who are saying, I'm not getting the miles that I need. I mean, it's really important for you to kind of turn this whole message of, oh, we're in a freight recession on its head and say, hey, we got the freight, y'all. We got the freight. We can pay you. Come here. I just think that's really important for carriers to keep in mind. So
yeah, just so did the response on this, did it surprise you like it did me?
Yes, absolutely. I thought for sure it would be. I didn't think they would be as optimistic as they were. So I hope
Yeah.
they're right.
Yeah, you and me both.
All right. So we asked them on question 6, we asked them, what are your top 3 concerns right now? When you look at this, I mean, overwhelmingly, it's just, listen, I'm trying to survive over here, right? Like I'm trying to pay my bills. And so when you look at that, obviously the pay and the home time are, kind of the top dogs, if you will. But look at my personal health and saving for retirement, where those kind of come in here. Again, these lend itself to that benefits conversation that we were talking about. And just this is a great reminder for fleets as you're looking at what is my messaging going to be as I'm going into 2024. How am I really going to focus on, what I want to highlight with drivers in recruiting and retention. These things are super important because this is what people are concerned about right now. And I think we all, from our standpoint, especially because we look at this data all the time, home time and pay tend to be like the two, the usual suspects, if you will. But when you start throwing in things like the health of a family member, my personal health, saving for retirement, those are things we don't talk about quite as much.
Yeah. Well, I think the major takeaway for me on this is really the importance that drivers place on that work-life balance. If you look at those top issues, obviously paying bills each month, obviously that talks about pay, but it also goes to the importance of paying the bills for the family, personal health, health of a family member, saving for retirement. 60% at home time and family life. So I think that work-life balance speaks to a couple things. Number one, you've already mentioned it, benefits and how important benefits are. I think the other thing that it matters is if you look at that 60% basically that's at home time and family life, when you tell a driver that you're going to get them home, get them home. get them home. If you're not getting drivers home when you tell them you will or when they've requested it, you talk about something that's going to create a problem. You talk about one of those things that's going to say, I'm out. That's the kind of things that they're talking about. So I think, that if you look at it, almost 80% of the total answers that were chosen here were related to family life, finances, health, spending time with the family. That is extremely important. Obviously, pay is important. We don't doubt that. We hear that all the time. But I think that work-life balance, that's something we talk about at PDA. I mean, we expect a lot from our people here. They work hard. We've got a great staff here that's really committed. But we also talk about the importance of once you leave work, you enjoy your family life. You have to have that work-life balance. So I think that's really important. And I think as you're talking with drivers, as you're communicating with drivers, I think it speaks to the importance of having a personal relationship with your drivers, just from the simple fact of obviously they're spending a lot of time alone, isolated on the road. So as your fleet managers are talking to drivers, know that family life's important. Know that that balance is important. So it's not just as important to get them home when you tell them you'll get them home, but it's important to have a personal relationship with them too, because you can see that it matters to them.
Definitely, definitely.
So let's go to question 7 here. If you were in charge of a trucking company and could do one thing and one thing only to attract and retain drivers, what would you do? So, not a surprise. Top 2 answers are raise pay and guarantee a minimum pay or mileage/loads. So, here's the interesting thing. So, we know over the last couple of years during COVID, most companies were raising pay. There was a kind of an industry-wide raise of pay. I think what this speaks to in some degree, and we've seen this in our data, is this is where, again, the freight recession is really affecting the driver's ability to make money. I'm not saying that they're not, I think if I ask anybody right now, whether they were in trucking or not, would you want to, if you could raise pay, would you do it? Everybody's going to say yes. Everybody's going to do that. But I think that from an expectation standpoint, particularly for these drivers that went through COVID, where freight was plentiful, everybody was making really good money, and now it's completely the opposite. I think this is where we're seeing how the freight recession is affecting driver pay, particularly driver pay expectations. My big thing, and I've talked about this before on the kind of the guarantee. I know that's kind of become somewhat of a popular thing. I think it's a very dangerous thing. Not dangerous that you shouldn't be offering it, but dangerous in how you're selling it. Because every person that I've talked to that has said, hey, we're thinking about implementing a guarantee pay policy. What do you think about that? Let's be honest, it's not a guarantee. It's conditional, but we're selling it as a guarantee. Drivers are buying it as a guarantee. And so when companies are bringing drivers in that guarantee is, $1,200 a week, there's an if you do this, if you do A, B, C, and D. But the first time that driver doesn't make that, for whatever reason, for the first time that driver doesn't make that driver's gone.
Right.
Because in their mind, when they see guarantee, they expect that that's what that number is going to be. And so I would just be, and I've cautioned a lot of people that have asked me about this. What would we do? You got to make it very, very clear that it's a condition. You got to do A, B, and C. But I would also make those conditions, reasonable, but also achievable. And there was a company that we did some work for several years ago. They had a guarantee pay, and there was literally about 40 different things the driver had to do to qualify for their guarantee pay. And they were losing drivers left and right because drivers would do 38 of the 40. And then the 2 things they didn't do, they're like, sorry, you didn't qualify. Well, you said it was guaranteed. Well, no, it's really not. So I just would be very careful. This is a real kind of stump speech for me because we listen to drivers all of the time that expect that pay and they don't get it. And so I would just be really, really careful with that.
Yeah.
What do you see on this?
Yeah, I agree. I think when you said like how you're selling it when it comes to your pay is super important. Like when we ask drivers what drives you, what's your biggest pet peeve? Remember, we've asked this before. When it comes to when you were recruited, what was your biggest pet peeve in that whole process? Overwhelmingly, they said, we don't trust you. Like, we just flat out don't trust recruiters. I mean, we did a word cloud of like all the responses. whoa. I mean, it was like, stop lying. I don't trust recruiter. Da, da. And so at the end of the day, you have to be honest about how you pay, what their earning potential is in the recruiting process, because you literally do yourself no favors to get a guy in a truck, promise him this guarantee, if you will, and then he ends up not making it. And then he goes and tells other people about it. And, I mean, it just kind of snowballs from there. So I would just say communicate how you pay your drivers in your recruitment messaging in the most honest way possible. Even if it's, listen, I know you're looking for this. This is the reality of what you will earn here. And I've talked to carriers over the years who have said, in some cases we win a driver just because we're honest. And they were going to go somewhere where they may have gotten paid a little more, but they weren't really sure if they trusted it. So I would just, I mean, that's kind of my biggest takeaway on this one. I thought this was such a fun question because I was surprised we didn't get more like kind of crazy. Here's what I do. I know we got a couple of those, but you know what I mean? Like this could
Yeah.
have been, I'm sure,
Well, yeah, I mean, there was a couple things, in here. You look at almost 10% said change to a more regional haul model to get people home more often. I think that goes back to some previous questions about that work life balance. The benefits are in there again that you don't see a ton of that. It's only 4.3%, but that to offer that excellent health benefit and 401k. Again, I still think that it speaks to the importance of benefits. And that's really one of the biggest takeaways for me on this whole thing is kind of how the health benefits thing really kind of popped out in
Yeah.
this.
Well, I think too, what's interesting is the lowest one on this list was the fuel economy, safety, and other bonuses to boost driver pay. Listen, I cannot tell you how many hours on end carriers spend in a boardroom talking about a sign on bonus. Okay. It's like, y'all, if we're really going to focus on what matters, and I'm not saying if you have one, great. If you don't, great. That's not, I don't, it's neither here nor there for me. But what I'm saying is that's not what's moving the needle, and this data tells us that for sure, for sure.
Yeah, well, I think honestly, I think on that whole sign-on bonus, I think drivers now kind of understand it's been out in the industry long enough. The drivers understand whatever that number is of the sign-on bonus, that it's not like they walk in that day and get a check for that amount.
Yeah,
I think they know that again, just like the guarantee pay model, there's stipulations and conditions in order to get that number. And I think drivers understand that now. And that kind of goes back to my point on the guarantee pay is that before too long, they're going to understand that guarantee pay too.
yeah. No, you're right. You're right. That'll be interesting to kind of follow that. Okay, number 8, question number 8 that we asked them was, when you're looking for a new driving job, are you more inclined to apply for a company you're familiar with or not? So this is kind of the world I live in, right, Scott? So we are constantly preaching the value of your employer brand, your employer value proposition. We say EVP a lot, one of the acronyms that we use. And at the end of the day, I think what this data tells us is, listen, I prefer to kind of have some familiarity. Would I apply if it's the right opportunity? Sure, I would. But most of these drivers are telling us, I want to have a little familiarity. So whenever we talk about building brand preference and doing those, like if you talk about the driver lead funnel, which that's kind of the world we live in, living at the top of that funnel where you're just hanging out online, your brand is hanging out online where drivers are, it allows them to go, oh, there's so and so. Oh, I saw that social post with, ABC trucking. And then I see it again. And, just in the back of their mind, they've heard of you. They're familiar, okay, with your brand. So that when they are ready to make a move, maybe there's some sort of brand preference that's been established there. So, I mean, I think at the end of the day, too, it's important to remember not only are you actually building your brand with potential drivers, but drivers like to see their carrier's brand out there. So from a retention standpoint, oh, look, my company's doing this, or my company's sponsoring this, or, you know, I'm at a truck show and I see my brand. I think it comes into play there.
Yeah. So you said this a couple days ago. We were talking about how many times that it takes for people, whether it's drivers or other, when they're looking at something online. How many times? What's kind of the average for it really for people to quote unquote kind of be familiar with it?
Yeah, so we always say that a potential driver needs to have some sort of interaction with your brand 8 to 10 times before they're going to take an action. So they need to encounter your brand, whether it be, and again, this is not like, hey, we're hiring in Ohio, come work for us. That's not necessarily what we're talking about. Matter of fact, what we've seen is that we have drivers, there's potential drivers that are engaging with your brand. Maybe they're following you on social media because you do a lot of fun videos or something like that. And they're not even looking for a job now, but all of those times that they see your brand are counting in those 8 to 10. So maybe they, even some old school strategies, Scott, maybe they see your billboard, maybe they hear you on
There you
Sirius
go.
radio, maybe they see a job description for a job you have on a job board. Maybe they see a YouTube video as they're on YouTube watching, how to fix something on their truck. A pre-roll ad comes. There's lots of different ways to kind of put your brand in front of drivers. And I think at the end of the day, the more familiar they are with you, even if they don't drive for you today, the better off that you are. And it also helps with retention. So, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for this one. We've never asked this one. So I thought this was kind of interesting how it turned out.
So would you say you're the advertising guru here? Certainly, I'm not. What I look at here is that this is a marathon, not a sprint. It's
Absolutely.
going to take time to build that brand, right?
Yeah, and the reality is that there's lots of folks in the market today that have completely turned their funnel off. And if you think you're going to turn it back on and all of a sudden you're going to get the leads you want, that is not going to happen. We have the data behind that shows that it takes, you have to spend twice as much to get to where you were from a budget standpoint. It does not pay off in the long run to cut your funnel off.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting when it comes back to see kind of how everybody, how they perform here.
Yeah.
So
So let's look at question 9 here. And so I definitely know that you've got thoughts, on this. This is right up your alley. So when applying for a driving job during after hours timeframes for driving recruiting departments, I prefer to A, chat with a virtual assistant rather than leave a voicemail for a recruiter if it means my application is processed faster. B, I prefer to leave a voicemail and speak with a live recruiter upon their return to work, or I prefer to utilize whatever technology is available to get a recruiter the information that they need. So the big one here is almost 50% chose C. They prefer to utilize whatever technology is available. So here's your soapbox, Priscilla. Here's your chance to talk about technology. What do you think about this one?
yeah, I listen. I've been wanting to ask this for a while because sometimes we sit in conference rooms with carriers and they are convinced that drivers are not embracing some of the technology that's available today. And I can tell you the data that we see, not just here in this question that we ask drivers, but the amount of results that come out of today's technology is it is unbelievable, to be honest. Like for example, we did a beta and we said, listen, we're going to take a live recruiter out of the process for 2 weeks for a client of ours. And we said, let's let this AI advanced automation, let's let this bot help us recruit this driver from basic information questions to the full app without a live recruiter. And the data, I mean, they had 36% more full apps in a 2 week period than they did month over month. I mean, it was unbelievable. And so at the end of the day, what this tells me is the driver wants to get us their information. They're applying for a job just like if we were. So we embrace technology. We shouldn't assume that drivers don't. And so I think at the end of the day, you've got to really ask yourself, am I recruiting smart? Am I being smart with how I'm recruiting? And a lot of times you could use your recruiter's time to work on some things that really you're struggling with. I've heard a lot of fleets lately say we are really struggling with our no-show rate. Like it was good and now it's gotten to a point where it's not as good as it was. And so how do we help our no-show rate? You know what? Put technology in place that helps you recruit on the front end. Use some of this advanced AI automation that's in place. Like we have a tool called Lead Assist that does this, but use some of that and then have your recruiters focus on some of that nurturing where, hey, Scott, are we going to see you on Monday? Really use that for what you're really needing to focus on. I mean, I just think that there's a lot of folks that have opinions here about, oh, we don't know if a driver really wants to talk to a bot or things like that. And at the end of the day, we talk to bots all day and we don't we don't realize
We don't
it.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also the systems allow for a recruiter to hop in when they want to. Like if a driver asks a question and it's not a standard question that kind of the bot knows how to answer, it notifies a recruiter and the recruiter says, hey, let me answer that for him and continue on in the process. And so I just think there's a lot of technology in place that can save fleets a lot of money. Also, it can save them on, like I said, like really focusing on what matters. Drivers are just like we are, and they use innovation and technology just like we do. So that really is the takeaway for me.
Yeah. To me, just again, from an amateur viewpoint here, it really lends itself to accessibility. How accessible are you? And the more accessible you are, the better chance you have of setting yourself up for success. And that's true, obviously, from a recruiting standpoint, but frankly, it's also true from a retention standpoint. The more accessible you are to your drivers, the more they have the ability to communicate with you and you with them, the better you're going to be at retention too. So that this to me speaks all about accessibility.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. And a lot of times, one of the biggest complaints from recruiters, Scott, is that drivers don't call them back. Well, they're not calling me back when I'm here and I'm working. Well, you're there 8 to 5. They're driving. Like they may not call you then, but if you have technology in place that can nurture those leads when you're not in the office, why not? So
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that. This has nothing to do with the data, but it's ironic because one of the things that we hear from the drivers the most is my fleet manager doesn't call me back. And so maybe the recruiter needs to talk to the fleet manager and say, hey, just so you know, this is how it feels.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. All right. So number 10, we asked drivers, what was the last thing that you saw that made you want to apply for a job with another carrier other than the one you drive for today? So what was the last thing that kind of impacted you to say, I think I want to go to work there. And we can kind of see where these land. Job descriptions was the leader of the pack. For those of you, by the way, I think we should make a little note here, Scott, for those who are just listening and aren't viewing the video. We do have, if you go to YouTube and look at the video, we do have the survey pulled up here. So if you're just listening, you can go watch the video and it has the data there, or you can just download it and kind of go through it with us. But
They should be watching the video anyways, because let's be honest, we both look stellar
oh
today.
well,
So they need to watch the video anyways.
speak for yourself. But yeah, um, but really, what drivers told us was some of the last things that they saw that really made them more inclined to apply for a position was job description was big. Also, online driver reviews. Listen, I always say that if sometimes people will ask me like, what do you think carriers aren't doing that you think they should be doing more of? Listen, I would go all in on reputation management because I can tell you, I mean, think about today. I don't think I buy anything, nothing, even a $10 something on Amazon until I read the reviews and I find out which one I want to buy. Like drivers are the same way. This is a huge decision. They're making a decision to come and work for you, to leave the job where they are today. If you think they're not going and reading your driver reviews, you are crazy, because they are going, they are reading them. If you're not responding, like we have, there, I run into carriers all the time. I'm like, hey, who's monitoring your driver reviews and your social media posts? What do you mean? I'm like, someone's got to be monitoring that. We shared some
Mhm.
data in our data rundown that we did with our clients last week, and basically it said, hey, if you're not responding, then like 40% of your followers are going to be like, why do I want to hang out here? They're not even engaging with me. And so I think that's really important. At the end of the day, making sure you have a diversified media mix where you're going to show up in all these places where drivers are going to see you, whether it be on social media, whether it be more traditional type media with radio or billboards, if you want to go that route. But really looking at, what do my job descriptions look like online? What am I monitoring my driver reviews? Do I have a good video strategy in place? Because I know drivers love to look at video. It's just, those are things that are really important. A lot of times carriers will say, well, we just do, one strategy, and it does really well for us. Well, you're missing out on a whole segment of the market when you do that. So, and again, it goes back to the whole, like you said earlier, the 8 to 10 times, the do drivers have a preference for your brand or not? So I don't know. I just think it's important to make sure that you're really focused on what matters to drivers and what they're seeing that makes them take an action.
Yeah. So let's go to question 11 here. This was an interesting question. I'll be honest with you, Priscilla, when you sent me this, when we were talking about putting the survey together, I was like, I'm not sure I understand this question, but that's why you're in advertising and I'm not. So, are you committed to the trailer type you're hauling today, or would you be willing to switch for a new driving opportunity? And 71%, pretty overwhelming majority said that they would be willing to change the trailer type that they haul today for the right opportunity, pay, and home time. So there's pay and home time again. So, kind of from your standpoint on the advertising side of things, how important is this? How important is this for carriers to look at?
Yeah, and so this question actually came from the carriers that we worked with. We had a few carriers that said, because we always ask, like, how can we increase the pond we're fishing in so that you have more options and that your net is not cast so wide that you're getting, unqualified apps. But how can we position your messaging and your recruitment marketing in such a way where you're targeting guys that really could potentially drive for you? Because in some cases, they're like, oh, if I'm a flatbed carrier, then I'm probably not going to be able to hire van drivers. Well, what this data tells us is that is not necessarily the case. Now, we understand there are cases where you have to train folks. Depending on specific, if you haul hazmat and things like that, there might be some other, certifications and licenses that the drivers need to have. But though that training and all of that can be done once you start the recruiting process, if you're willing to do that. But I think, just speaking in general terms, what we had a few clients that wanted to know is if I'm a van driver, am I always a van driver, kind of thing? And so this data basically tells us that if the opportunity is right, if I'm going to get the pay and that work life balance that you talked about, Scott, then I'm willing to haul a different type of trailer than I'm actually hauling today, if you can train me and all the things, right? So I just think in some cases, especially those that have a little more specialized type trailers, if you are willing to train folks and get them, all of that education that they need to safely pull your trailers, then there's a market out there for you, most likely, by this data. And so, I think on average, drivers say that they're recruited multiple times a week by all different, the driver survey has said that before. They're being recruited by other trailer types. Your drivers are. So why wouldn't you do the same, right? So I don't know. Again, this one was requested by some of our clients. So that's why we went and asked this one. Yeah.
Did the results on this one, did that surprise you, or is this kind of what you expected?
I was surprised it was that high. Like I did think it would probably be at least half, just based on the experience that we have and seeing some of this data. I thought at least half, but I didn't anticipate it being that high at
Yeah.
71%. So that, I mean, I think that's good news, honestly. I mean, and you think about it, like from my perspective, it's not like I do B2B marketing today. I wouldn't, if someone said, "Hey, do you want to do B2C marketing?" Like, no, I would not, because I love where I am at conversion. But I'm just saying, like, when you think about it, translates in other occupations too, where folks don't always stay in the exact same lane, no pun intended, that they're in. So I don't know. It's interesting. So but yeah, our clients ask us to ask that one. And then the very last question that we asked, and from time to time we'll ask this because, you know, us being an advertising agency, we always like to know, like, where do you spend your time when you're online or on your smartphone? So this particular question was, what apps do you use the most on your smartphone today? So listen, YouTube overwhelmingly, and they could choose their top two, by the way. And so YouTube was overwhelmingly number one, followed up by Facebook. Listen, us old school folks are still living on Facebook. Um, but what jumped out at me on this one was that TikTok is at 21% now. I guess last year, maybe when we asked about TikTok, it was lower than that. And so we're just kind of keeping our eye on TikTok. Listen, every time I speak, Scott, I call it the TikTok question. I get the TikTok question. No matter what event I speak at, should I be on TikTok? Should I be advertising on TikTok? And here's the answer, just in case you're wondering about the TikTok question, is I always say, number one, you should definitely grab your brand's handle on TikTok. Like, if you are ABC Trucking and you have not grabbed that handle yet on TikTok and gotten ownership of that, someone else will. And then, on down the line, it could be tough to get that back, if you will. So I would say grab it. Hey, have a little fun with it. Like, create some videos if you want. I promise you, there's people in your organization that are on TikTok and would love nothing more than for you to say, "Hey, can y'all go create some TikToks?" And then share those and cross post them where drivers are hanging out. So on Facebook, on Instagram, you can kind of post your TikTok videos there. Now, we have been looking at, is it time yet to do any type of recruitment advertising on TikTok? We're not seeing that just yet. And I know people have big opinions about TikTok, China, all the things. I'm neither here nor
Oh, let's talk.
let's not.
Let's talk politics. Let's talk politics.
Let's not. So I'm not, I don't have a dog in that fight, but I will just say the data's showing us that drivers are hanging out there. So,
Well, Priscilla, so let's go back to when we interviewed Clarissa,
mhm.
because that's where her driver population and her kind of fans, for lack of better, that's where they reside. And I think if you go back, and I encourage people to go back to listen to her because she was fantastic. But if you go back, remember one of the things that she talked about was some of the best quote unquote advertising is what other drivers are saying. I mean, if you go back, the reason she's working at the carrier that she's at today is because they let her do TikTok. They let her go on there and talk about her job and what she's doing and the great things that that carrier is doing. So you don't have to have necessarily paid advertising. And I know you're going to reach through and slap me for saying that, but you don't have to have paid advertising. From my background, from my PR background, we call it earned
Yeah,
media,
exactly.
right? I mean, it's the free media, and so that's, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, the TikTok number has gone up, and I think you should encourage people within your organization to use it. Again, it goes back to the accessibility that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I just think that a lot of times carriers are terrified of this kind of thing, right? They're like, "Oh, I can't. Oh no, we can't release any videos on TikTok, or we don't want drivers pushing out content about us." Listen, they are anyway. They are anyway. So why not
They are.
find some brand ambassadors that have great things to say about you and let them be, a good brand advocate for you. Like I mean, that's really what it's all about. So, but I thought this was interesting. This was the last question that we asked. So we always try to keep the surveys to around 10 to 12 questions. We've learned that drivers really don't want to answer more than that at one time. So remember, if you want to get a downloadable PDF of this driver survey to share with your team, you can go to the resource.conversionia.com and get that. So Scott, we didn't do the actual resource part of our podcast today because look at all the data we shared.
Yeah, yeah. This is normally when we kind of give our, the data point that caught our eye. We just gave like a gazillion data points that have caught our eye over the survey. So, yeah, like Priscilla said, go to the resource.conversionia.com. You can also find these on our individual sites, the PDA and the conversion sites where you can download these. Yeah, this was, obviously a little bit of a different episode than we've done previously. But we just felt it was important to kind of walk through this data, what we learned, what we saw. Obviously, we'll be doing our next survey in the spring, some of similar questions. But I would recommend that if you've got an idea for a question or something that you would like to see on one of our upcoming surveys, to reach out to us on social media. You can email us. All that'll be in the show notes there with the podcast. But reach out to us. I mean, some of the best questions that we get are from our clientele, our customers, or just general feedback that we get from folks when they download these surveys. So if there's something that you'd like to see or a question that you would like to ask drivers, hit us up, and we'll definitely do that.
Yes. So thanks so much for listening to the resource today. If you had fun, give us a high five by leaving a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. Don't forget to hit that subscribe or follow button so you never miss an episode.
That's right. And as always, like I said, give us some feedback, shoot us an email, follow up with us, let us know what you think. And hey, for the next episode, Priscilla, it's going to be almost Christmas time. So, we'll have to have our Santa hats on and have a good time for Christmas. All right.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, guys. See you next time.